In 1917, sociologist Max Weber delivered this lecture entitled Science as a Vocation, in which he advanced a couple of very famous ideas. He outlined a very famous scientific and philosophical problem called the fact-value distinction, and he also gave an account of world history that has come to be known as the Disenchantment of the world. Now, Science as a Vocation has this weird beginning where Weber just kind of complains about his job for a few pages, but this complaint is actually going to open up into a profound analysis of modern life, and it's just going to blow your mind. So Max Weber begins this essay with the argument that modern universities are bad and they're only getting worse. And Weber's criticism is that the best people don't get hired or promoted. Weber says he sees people being promoted all the time purely because they are popular with students, not because of the depth or quality of their research. You kind of wonder if there's maybe some professional jealousy in play here. But why is Weber complaining about universities anyway? Well, remember, he's talking about science as a vocation. That is, science as a career, and so Weber's career is extremely important. He is, after all, one of the architects of what we now call social science, especially sociology. Weber supplies some insights about what it takes to be a scientist in the modern world, and gotta hand it to Weber, these are some Instagram-grade inspirational quotes. For nothing has any value for a human being as a human being, unless he can pursue it with passion. Normally, inspiration flourishes only on a foundation of very hard work. Ideas come in their own good time, not when we want them. After talking about the practical side of this vocation, like the job of science, Weber moves on to a deeper question about meaning. And he suggests there are two fundamental problems with science that threaten to make scientific work and intellectual life more generally meaningless. First, Weber says that science has entered a stage of specialization that has no precedent and that will continue for all time. This means that increasingly, people are dedicating their careers to ever more specialized fields. So the actual things that scientists are studying are literally becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. More specialized, more specialized, more specialized. The second problem that Weber identifies is that because of the very nature of science, scientists know that their work will become invalidated soon after it is completed. We all know that what we have achieved will be obsolete in 10, 20, or 50 years. That is the fate, indeed, that is the very meaning of scientific work. In the background of this argument is an alternative idea about what intellectual life ought to look like. If we think, for example, about German philosophers like Hegel or Marx, both of those men had grand theories with sweeping explanatory power. They attempted to give us master keys to understand how human civilization progresses through time. And the ambition of works like that is that they would stand the test of time. The same is true of art, Weber says. In the art world, artists, novelists, playwrights, sculptors don't produce a thing that they think is going to be obsolete in 5 or 10 years. They make something to last. But in the modern world, Weber suggests, we're no longer advancing these grand theories that explain everything. Intellectuals dedicate their careers to very specific fields, and their work is often invalidated shortly after they are dead. Part of this traces all the way back to the beginnings of the scientific method itself. In the early modern or pre-modern world, a scientist or a philosopher was someone who worked alone, the kind of lone genius who was sort of a Renaissance man, right? He had expertise in all matters, in theology and natural history and literature and poetry. But Francis Bacon was among the first to imagine that science might be more like an industry, that it would be a collective, cooperative enterprise where individuals were dedicated to one specific task as part of a much larger national or global project. And this model has been extraordinarily productive, but Weber wants the young scientist to consider, are you willing to dedicate your life to the study of dust mites so that you can become a footnote in someone else's better study of dust mites? So the specialization and then the invalidation of scientific work threatens to make human activity meaningless. How can I dedicate my life to the study of some subject when all of my efforts are going to be rendered obsolete in just a few years? It's just a problem. And Weber says this problem points to an even deeper tension in the fabric of modernity itself. Because Weber says it's now the case that we can only find meaning in our lives if we dedicate ourselves to the cause of progress. So I'm expected to labor and work and concentrate all my efforts on improving the future, and it's a future I'm not even going to be around for. So are we all willing to sign up for that? If we dedicate ourselves to making the future better than the present, and our whole lives are oriented towards a future that we will not live to see, and more profoundly, a future that may not thank us, but may condemn us as backward, primitive, stupid people who knew nothing, can you find meaning and satisfaction in that life? It's a tough question. This leads us to the disenchantment of the world, because we now believe, thanks to science, that the world is no longer mysterious. Everything in nature is under our control, or it will eventually be under our control, given enough time. And as a consequence, we no longer feel ourselves to be a part of nature, subordinate to nature, living within nature, and then plugged into these natural cycles that give shape to human life. Likewise, we feel disconnected from spiritual and religious concerns because we feel like we have dominion over nature and we can establish the rules as we see fit. In a way, we can be our own gods. Except, Weber says, we may still struggle with the meaning of life. And this takes us to the fact-value distinction. See, in the modern world, we just assume that scientific progress is good, and answering scientific questions is something worth doing. But Weber argues that science can't prove that science is worth doing using scientific principles. Science can't tell us whether or not contributing to this vast unfolding of natural knowledge is good. Science further assumes that the knowledge produced by any particular piece of scientific research should be important, in the sense that it should be worth knowing. And it is obvious that this is the source of all our difficulties. For this presupposition cannot be proved by scientific methods. It can only be interpreted with reference to its ultimate meaning, which we must accept or reject in accordance with our own ultimate attitude toward life. Think about cars. Math can tell you that there's a certain percent chance that you might die in a car accident every time you drive a car. Science can tell you that cars contribute to climate change and that the effects of climate change are going to be bad. But neither math nor science can tell you whether or not you should drive a car, or we as a society should drive cars. Do we like the convenience and utility of driving cars more than we fear extinction? Those are not scientific questions. You can only give philosophical or political answers to such questions. This is the nature of the fact-value distinction. Science can give us facts. It cannot explain to us the value of those facts. Science can tell you that eating lots of potato chips could contribute to heart disease, but it can't tell you whether heart disease is worse than a life without potato chips. This is a question I struggle with as someone who loves potato chips.
I do eat a lot of potato chips. Maybe I should go for a run.
So this has huge implications. When we think about potato chips, should we ban them? Should we restrict access to them? Should we put little nutritional labels on the bags so that people can actually know what kind of things they're putting into their bodies? Should we have potato chip education campaigns? Science can't tell us. It can't answer these questions. And of course, there are more serious issues in the world than potato chips. Bigger threats to human life that we ought to worry about regulating. Science can give us facts, but it can't tell us the value of those facts. That is the work of politics. So Weber gives us a really helpful way to think about the nature of history and human progress. For a very different account about the nature and value of human progress, you should take a look at this video over here, where Francis Fukuyama will try to convince you that the governments we now have in place are the very best humanity has to offer. I'll see you there. Talk to you soon.